We're beginning Chapter 1 of The Secret Team, the CIA and its allies in control of the United States and the world by Fletcher Prouty. The Secret Team, the real power structure. The most remarkable development in the management of America's relations with other countries during the quarter century since the end of World War II has been the assumption of more and more control over military and diplomatic operations at home and abroad by men whose activities are secret, whose budget is secret, whose very identities as often as not are secret. In short, by a secret team whose actions only those implicated in them are in a position to monitor and to understand. The secret team consists of security-cleared individuals in and out of government who receive secret intelligence data gathered by the CIA and the National Security Agency, and who react to those data when it seems appropriate to them with paramilitary plans and activities, training, advising, a not exactly impenetrable euphemism for such things as leading into battle and actual combat, Laotian tribal troops, Tibetan rebel horsemen, or Jordanian elite palace guards. Membership on the team, granted on a need-to-know basis, varies with the nature and location of the problems that come to its attention, and its origins derive from that sometimes elite band of men who serve with the World War II Office of Strategic Services, OSS, under the father of them all, General Wild Bill William J. Donovan. And in the old CIA, the power of the team derives from its vast intergovernmental or undercover infrastructure and its direct relationship with great private industries, mutual funds and investment houses, universities, and the news media, including foreign and domestic, with elements of power in more than 80 foreign countries, and is able, when it chooses, to topple governments, to create governments, and to influence governments almost anywhere in the free world. Whether or not the secret team had anything whatsoever to do with the deaths of Rafael Trujillo, Nigo Din Diem, Nigo Din Nu, Dag Hammarskjöld, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and others may never be revealed. But what is known is that the power of the team is enhanced by the cult of the gun, and by its sometimes brutal and always arbitrary anti-communist waving, even when real communism has nothing to do with the matter at hand. The team does not like criticism, investigation, or history, and is always prone to see the world as divided into but two camps, them and us. Sometimes the distinction may be as little as one dot, as in so.Viets. And Soviets, the so.Viets, being our friends and Soviets being the enemy, to be a member, you don't need question. You don't need questions. You don't ask. It's get on the team or else. One of its most powerful weapons in the most political and powerful capitals of the world is that of exclusion, to be denied the need of no status like being a member of the team, even though one may have all the necessary clearances, is to be totally blackmailed and eliminated from further participation. Politically, if you are cut from the team and from its insider knowledge, you are dead. In many ways and by many criteria, the secret team is the inner sanctum of the new religious order. He gets into it right off the bat, doesn't he? At the heart of the team, of course, are a handful of top executives of the CIA and the National Security Council. Most notably the chief White House advisor of the President of Foreign Policy Affairs. Around them evolves a sort of inner ring of presidential officials, civilian and military men from the Pentagon, and career professionals in the intelligence community. It is quite often difficult to tell exactly who many of these men really are, Besides, some may wear a uniform and the rank of general and really be with the CIA, and others may be as inconspicuous as the executive assistant to some cabinet officer's chief deputy. Out beyond the rings is an extensive and intricate network of government officials with responsibility for or expertise in some specific field that touches on national security or foreign affairs. Think tank analysis, businessmen who travel a lot or whose business, import-export or cargo airline operations, are useful. Academic experts in this or that technical subject or geographic region, and quite importantly, alumni of the intelligence community, a service from which there are no unconditional resignations. All true members of the team remain in power centers, whether in office with the incumbent administration or out of office with the hard score set. They simply rotate to and from official jobs and the business world or the pleasant haven of academia. Thus, the secret team is not a clandestine super planning board of super general staff, but even more damaging to the coherent conduct of foreign and military affairs. It is a bewildering collection of semi-permanent or temporarily assembled action committees and networks that respond pretty much ad hoc of his desires. There was another most important statement in the McNamara-Taylor report of October 2nd, 1963. It should be possible to withdraw the bulk of U.S. personnel by that time, by the end of 1965. This statement came at a key point in time. Like others, it is written by secret team insiders who knew the president's mind and how far they could go in setting forth ideas which he would accept and yet be acceptable to their own plans. Reports such as the October 2nd, 1963 document were not written in Saigon, and they were not written by the men whose names appeared on them. This pivotal report was written in Washington by members of the secret team. Although it contained a lot of updated material from Saigon, some of which had been transmitted to Saigon verbatim for the express purpose of having it then retransmitted back to Washington for inclusion in the report with the all-important Saigon dateline. One may be certain that this report contained a skillful mixture of what the president wanted to hear and what its authors in Washington wanted the president to read. Therefore, when it included the blunt and unequivocal statement that it should be possible to withdraw the bulk of U.S. personnel by that time, all of the authors, cover and undercover, were in tune with the times. They knew the president was favorably considering means to extricate the United States from Vietnam. The secret team had had its day with Kennedy on the beaches of the Cuban Bay of Pigs. Kennedy had minutely reviewed the debacle, and from that time on, he was ever alert for the earliest signs of an undercover operation that might expand and get set so out of hand as to involve this country in any more such disasters. The team had come a long way since that dismissal period in April 1961 and had learned well how to live and thrive with Jack Kennedy. In spite of his caution, one way to do this was to be certain to spell things correctly, meaning hew close to his line. It is a safe bet to say that this forecast personnel withdrawn by the end of 1965 was the maneuvering time they wanted and what Kennedy would accept in their language, so that he too would have time to get reelected and then carry out his own decisions as he had related them to Senator Mansfield. It appeared that Kennedy felt that with the obstacle of the Diem regime out of the way, he would have the opportunity to disintegrate this nation from the war that it had so far been able to keep from becoming a runaway overt action. I gotta read that again. It appears that Kennedy felt that with the obstacle of the Diem regime out of the way, he would have the opportunity to disengage this nation from the war that he had so far been able to keep from becoming a runaway covert action. Up to the end of 1963, all U.S. Army troops in South Vietnam, with the exception of a small number of military advisory and assistant groups, MAGs, MAAG, Military Advisory and Assistant Groups. Okay. I got to remember these because if I just say MAG later on, you're not going to know what I'm talking about, and I won't know what I'm talking about. So, Military Advisory and Assistance Group. Okay. The Military Advisory and Assistant Group and a few other such positions were there under the operational control of the CIA. This was flimsy cover, and it was a poor device to maintain that the United States was not overtly involved in military activity in Indochina, but the device did achieve its purpose of keeping the level of the war to a minimum. Within 30 days of the Taylor-McNamara report, Diem and his brother were dead. The government of South Vietnam was in the hands of the popular, powerful General Duong Van, Big Minh. Minh was a strong enough man to have made Vietnamization work, but within another 30 days, President Kennedy was dead, and the government of the United States was in the hands of Lyndon B. Johnson. Big Ben may have been the man Kennedy wanted in Saigon, but he did not last long with the new Johnson administration. 4 days after Kennedy's death on November 26, 1963, President Johnson issued an order reaffirming United States policy in South Vietnam, and at the same time referring to the new government of General Minh as a provisional government, presaging and assuring the inevitability of another change in the near future. President Johnson's advisors wanted a benevolent military regime in Saigon, and they wanted one which would be more suitable than Minh's. Kennedy would have had Minh Kennedy would have had Minh rally around him a popular and strongly independent Vietnamese administration. After Kennedy's death, U.S. policy called for leadership in Saigon, which would accept continuing United States participation in the international affairs of that government. Less than 15 days after the death of Kennedy, Secretary of Defense McNamara was on his way back to Saigon to assess the situation under General Minh and to report to the new President of the United States. This time, the McNamara report was, to quote the New York Times, laden with gloom. His assessment laid the groundwork for the long haul and included decisions to step up the covert war against North Vietnam in early 1964 and to increase American aid to South Vietnam. Within 90 days, the government of Big Minh was eased out of office and replaced by the more tractable General Nguyen Khan. There are those who say that because he had approved certain covert actions in Indochina, President Kennedy was planning to expand the war. It is true that accelerating covert operations is like stoking the fire, but we should weigh Kennedy's actions against the fact that the United States had been actively involved in clandestine operations in Indochina since 1945, as well as in other areas of the world for many years, and that these activities did not signify that the administration concerned had embarked upon a course leading to open warfare. The paramount condition underlying any approval for clandestine operations is absolute control at the top. The secret team will come up with operational schemes all the time and will seek approval for as many as it believes it can get away with. The only way to cope with this is for the president to make it clear that there will be no covert operations without proper approval, and that he will always be in a position to cancel or disapprove of any and all operations as he sees fit. Truman and Eisenhower knew this and practiced it. Kennedy learned it at the Bay of Pigs. Eisenhower had terminated major operations in Tibet, Laos, and Indochina without escalating them into open war. Until his death, Kennedy had held the line at the limited level of covert activities in Indochina, and American participation there was strictly to an advisory capacity. Of course, we all recognize that this advisory role in many cases pure combat. Clandestine operations that are small and strictly controlled with a fixed and time-limited objective can be terminated at any time, whether they succeed or fail. However, clandestine operations that become large, that are permitted to continue and to be repeated, that become known or compromised, and yet still continue, as in Laos, are very dangerous and can lead to open hostilities and even war. Thus, when the secret team proposed a vastly escalated covert campaign against North Vietnam in December 1963, they were laying positive plans for the major military action that followed in 1965. Here's a footnote for right here. McNamara used to make the distinction that the war against the North Vietnam was sophisticated, whereas the war in South was unsophisticated. The feeling was that there was an element of design and control over the war in the North, which was not possible in the South. Walt Rostow had his own term for this. He liked to say that the war in the North was a sort of game for tit for tat. His idea was that if they hit us, we'd hit back. This type of game is all the more sophisticated when we hit clandestinely. They strike back overtly, then we strike back claiming they hit first. Within 30 days after Kennedy's death, all of this changed drastically. In his report of December 21, 1963, McNamara stated Vietnam progress had been great during this period since the coup. We need also to have major increases in both military and United States operation missions staffs. Later, he added, our first need would be to... Wait a minute. Okay, just to clarify, USOM means United States Operations Mission. USOM. This is for me and you, because later on there's no abbreviations page like the other book I was reading, and even still sometimes abbreviations don't show up in there. So United States Operations Mission Staff. Later he added, our first need would be immediate U2 mapping of the whole Laos-Cambodian border. This we are preparing to do on an urgent basis, and then one other step we can take is to expand existing limited but remarkably effective operations on the Laos side, the so-called Operation Hard Nose. Plans to expand this would be prepared and presented for your approval in about 2 weeks, and further, as to the waterways, the military plans presented in Saigon were unsatisfactory, and a special naval team is being sent at once from Honolulu to determine what more can be done. Then he noted plans for covert action into North Vietnam was prepared as well. Plans for covert action in North Vietnam were prepared as we had requested and were an excellent job. General Krulak of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is chairing a group that will lay out a program in the next 10 days for your consideration. All of these statements were evidence of typical throughout secret team groundwork. McNamara closed out this report, which was so vastly different from the early October 2nd one, that he and Maxwell Taylor had submitted to President Kennedy by saying, we should watch the situation very carefully, running scared and hoping for the best, but preparing for more forceful moves if the situation does not show early signs of improvement. This was not the report of a group that was planning to wind down the war. It was a report that delineated various avenues of endeavors, and that looked well into the future. This was the first such report made to President Johnson, and it was not designed to be reassuring. On the same day that McNamara report was being handed to President Johnson, a former president was writing a totally different statement for the readership of the general public. President Harry S. Truman, observing the turn of events since the death of President Kennedy and pondering developments since his administration, wrote for the Washington Post a column also dateline December 21st, 1963. For some time I have been disturbed by the way the CIA has been diverted from its original assignment. It has become an operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government. I never had any thought that when I set up the CIA that it would be injected into peacetime cloak and dagger operations. Some of the complications and embarrassment that I think we have experienced are in part attributable to the fact that this quiet intelligence arm of the president has been so removed from its intended role that it is being interpreted as a symbol of sinister and mysterious foreign intrigue and a subject for Cold War enemy propaganda. Truman was disturbed by the events of the past 90 days. Those ominous days of October, November, and December 1963. Men all over the world were disturbed by those events. Few men, however, could have judged them with more wisdom and experience than Henry S. Truman, for it was he who, in late 1947, had signed into law the National Security Act. This act, in addition to establishing the Department of Defense, DoD, with a single secretary at its head and with 3 equal and independent services, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, also provided for a National Security Council and the Central Intelligence Agency. And during those historic and sometimes tragic 16 years since the act had become law, he had witnessed changes that disturbed him, as he saw that the CIA had been diverted from the original assignment that he and the legislators who drafted the act had so carefully planned. Although even in his time, he had seen the beginning of the move of the CIA into covert activities, there can be little doubt that the diversion to which he made reference was not one that he would have attributed to himself or any other president. Rather, the fact that the CIA had gone into clandestine operations and had been injected into peacetime cloak and dagger operations and had been so much removed from its intended role was more properly attributable to the growing and secret pressures of some other power source. As he said, the CIA had become a symbol of sinister and mysterious foreign intrigue. There can be no question that the events prior to this statement heavily influenced his arriving at these disturbing conclusions. It is possible, but quite improbable, that Harry Truman knew about the McNamara report of the same date. But the coincidence between the appearance of Truman's commentary and of McNamara's report is compelling, especially since McNamara's report was the first selected by the New York Times for publication in its expose of the Pentagon Papers. Now that the McNamara report has been published and has emerged from the depths of security, it can be added that this pivotal report was not written by McNamara. It was not even written in Saigon. This report, like the one dated October 2nd, was actually written by a group of secret team members and was drafted by them solely to impress upon the new president their idea of increasing gravity and frightful responsibility of the war in Indochina. It was not for nothing that the Times noted that this report was laden with gloom and that it offered nowhere any easy, quick penance. Panache. Yeah, penance. It was not for nothing that the Times noted that this report was laden with gloom and that it offered nowhere any ease or quick panache for early victory in Indochina. It was not intended to do so. In fact, it did just the opposite. It left no room for any course of action other than eventual escalation of war. This report and the ones that followed close upon it were carefully and skillfully written to instill into the new president an indelible belief that the war in Vietnam was the greatest issue facing the free world. They hammered home the fanciful belief that if South Vietnam fell before the onslaught of communism, the whole world would be engulfed.
Right.
As was common with reports such as this one, the first time McNamara saw it was during a few days' stopover in Honolulu on his return trip from Saigon. It had been put together from many sources and drafts, primarily from the CIA and other secret operations-related areas, by the Office of the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, SACSA. Let's see. Special Assignment and Covert Operations related areas. I'm doing this for me. By the Office of Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. Special Assignment for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. Okay, SACSA. Special Assignment, Counterinsurgency, Special Assignment. Right. In the Joint Staff under the skilled and dedicated direction of Major General Victor H. Krulak. So SACSA was, I'm just going to read this whole thing over again, my goodness. It had been put together from many sources and drafts, primarily from the CIA and other secret operations-related areas, by the Office of the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities in the Joint Staff under the skilled and dedicated direction of Major General Victor H. Krulak. General Krulak was the same man who was designated in the body of the report to chair a group that will lay out a program of covert action in Vietnam in the next 10 days. In Pentagonese for highly classified matters, General Krulak's office in the Joint Staff was described as being responsible for serving as the Joint Chiefs Staff point of contact in his field of interest with related activities in the military departments, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, OSD, and other agencies of the government. This was the unclassified way of saying that his office was the point of contact within the Department of Defense for the CIA. His contacts in this select circle in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where such men as General Edward G. Lansdale, who was McNamara's special assistant for all matters involving the CIA, and Special Operations William Bundy, who appeared throughout the Pentagon Papers as one of the key men of the secret team, and was at that time a recent alumnus of the CIA. With 10 years in the agency behind him, John T. McNaughton, another member of the secret team, and a McNamara favorite, Joseph Califano, who moved from the Office of Secretary of Defense to the White House, General Richard B. Stilwell of the White House Special Committee, details follows, and others. The preparations for and the writing of such influential reports as this one attributed to McNamara was a work of skill, perseverance, and high art. Whenever it was decided that McNamara would go to Saigon, select members of the secret team sent special messages to Saigon on ultra-secure CIA communications network. Laying out a full scenario for his trip, the Secretary of Defense and his party would be shown combat-dedicated villages that had paths and ruts that had been caused by the hard work and repeated rehearsals, non-battles that had taken place in between natives, Vietnamese soldiers, and Americans. McNamara would be taken on an itinerary planned in Washington. He would see close in combat designed in Washington, and he would receive field data and statistics prepared for him in Washington. All during his visit, he would be in the custody of skilled briefers who knew what he should see, whom he should see, and whom he should not see. In many cases, the messages relayed from Saigon, ostensibly written by and for McNamara while he was there, had been sent to Saigon from Washington before he had arrived there. When a total communication system such as the available to the secret team exists all over the world and is concealed by secrecy, it is not difficult to yield, to urge, to play God. It is not difficult to yield the urge to play God and make everything come out as desired. While McNamara was on his trip, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities and his staff, augmented by CIA and others, were working around the clock on the report. There were times when General Krulak himself stayed at his desk for 36 hours or more to keep a full staff going while secretaries and typists were shuttled to and from their homes for rest periods to get the massive report done in time. While all of the writing was underway, cartographers and artists were working on illustrative materials for the final report and for the big briefing charts that became a part of McNamara's personal style. The final report, perhaps 2 inches thick, was printed on bound in legal-size black goatskin cover with the name of the president engraved in gold on it. The finished report was rushed by helicopter to Andrews Air Force Base about 20 miles from the Pentagon and placed aboard a military jet fighter for a non-stop mid-air refueled flight to Honolulu, where it was handed to Mr. McNamara and his staff. He familiarized himself with the report while his jet flew him to Washington, where he disembarked at Andrews Air Force Base, trotted with the report tucked under his arm to the waiting presidential helicopter, and was whisked to the White House lawn to be greeted by the president. As soon as he got into the White House, an aide distributed the closely guarded and controlled papers of the report to those who had the need to know, and discussions began. This recapitulation is worth setting forth in detail because it underscores not only the resourcefulness of the secret team, but its ability to perform super miracles in an age when mere miracles are commonplace. The secret team always fights for the minds, the time, and the attention of the top echelon men. It moves fastest and most adroitly when others are off guard. This report of December 21st, 1963 was absolutely crucial to the interests of the secret team. 25 years of driving devoted work by secret team members through a whole generation of critical events culminated in the Vietnam War. Never before in all the long history of civilization was a country to devote so much of its resources, its men and their lives, its money and its very prestige in so strange an event as that which is called the war in Vietnam. It made the coup d'etat in Guatemala and Iran, the rebellion in Indochina, the escape of the Dalai Lama, and the underground war in Tibet, the Bay of Pigs, and the wasting war in Laos all pale before its magnitude. President Johnson, for all his experience and native ability, had not yet been signed by the fire of experience as Jack Kennedy in Cuba or Eisenhower by the U-2. Johnson was a natural wheeler-dealer with courage and a flair for getting things done, but he had not yet learned how to say no and make it stick. Rather, he had the inclination to defer the issue to a later day. This was the ideal formula for the secret team, and they struck while the iron was hot. There is another important factor to weigh in considering the agility and cunning of the secret team. In bureaucratic Washington, few things are worth more than prior information. If a subordinate knows now what his boss is going to know tomorrow, he is in the same position that the gambler would like to be in if he knew which horse was going to win in a future race. The secret team has set itself up through the use and control of intelligence data, both real and manufactured, to know what its bosses are going to know later. It applies most significantly in such events as the McNamara report, as anyone who has perceived the full significance of the routine described earlier will realize. The secret team knows what the report of the Secretary of Defense is going to be even before he does, and therefore before all the rest of official Washington does. This 24 to 48 hour lead time of critical and most influential knowledge is a most valuable commodity. Men from many staffs who have no real responsibilities in the covert activities of this nation break their backs for a glimpse of what the secret team is doing, and for this special privilege they pay one way or another. At other times, the team will extract from a report such as has been described a few paragraphs that will be skillfully leaked to the press, and to selected businessmen background briefings are held, most frequently in some quiet conference room, in the new state building, or perhaps in the big executive dining room. Allen Dulles had in his... I'm just adding shit, aren't I? Background briefings are held most frequently in some quiet conference room in the new state building, or perhaps in the big executive dining room. Allen Dulles had in the old E Street headquarters of the CIA, and there a substaff of the secret team will pore over the language of a brief item designated or designed especially for Periscope in Newsweek, or perhaps for its old favorite, Joe Aslop. In any event, advanced top-level information is a most valuable and sealable commodity. But nowhere is it more valuable than in the White House itself and in the offices of the Secretary of Defense and of the Director of Central Intelligence. George Bundy, Mike Forrestal, Joe Califano, Maxwell Taylor, and others always looked good when they could sit down, calm and composed, with the President and with Rusk and McNamara, already knowing what was in the reports these men were poring over, page by page. McNamara would give one of his classic, fully charted briefings of his trip, utilizing for this purpose the originals of the artwork in his report, and have the President and other cabinet officers hanging on his every word, words he had been learning and rehearsing while he sped by jet from Honolulu. At the same time, the secret team members were secure in their knowledge that they already knew every word that McNamara was going to say, and that they had staff studies and presidential messages already drafted to send to the ambassador and the commanders in Indochina. It may seem strange to readers of the Pentagon Papers to note how often a report from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretary of Defense would be followed the next day by one from the Secretary of Defense to the President, and then almost on the same day by a lengthy message to the ambassador in Saigon. What may seem even more strange is that the reply from the ambassador would follow with all of its details within 24 hours. This was not a miracle. This was pre-planning by the secret team. The whole thing was done at the same time, and even the reply from the ambassador had been anticipated by a closely guarded message via CIA channels to a CIA man on the embassy staff in Saigon, giving him the language to use for the ambassador's reply almost as soon as the President's wire arrived. Abracadabra, right? The secret team seldom left anything to chance, and since they had the means of the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, they made it a way of life to use it. The Pentagon Papers reveal in the total listing of names of the principal writers of those papers a good compilation of key members of the secret team. At that time, however, it would be very misleading to accept the list as complete and meaningful for anything more than this one area of activity. Furthermore, some of the most influential members of the team are not even mentioned in those pages. There were and are many men who are not in government, who are prime movers of the secret team activity. George Soros, Rockefeller. Only 1 month after McNamara's report, General Maxwell D. Taylor, and Ghislaine Maxwell, right? And Jeffrey Epstein. Everybody knows that guy, right? Look into that. 1 month after McNamara's report, General Maxwell D. Taylor, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, kept the ball rolling with a report to Senator McNamara dated January 22, 1964. It is important to keep in mind that Maxwell Taylor was on the same trip to Saigon with McNamara that resulted in the October 2nd, 1963 report, the one that confronted the home by the end of 1965 theme. Now, less than 4 months later, he was saying, it would be unrealistic to believe that a complete suppression of the insurgency can take place in 1 or even 2 years. And further, the United States must make plain to the enemy our determination to see the Vietnam campaign through to a favorable conclusion. To this, we must prepare for whatever level of activity may be required, and prepared must then proceed to take actions as necessary to achieve our purposes surely and promptly. The Joint Chiefs of Staff believe that our position in Cambodia, our attitude towards Laos, our actions in Thailand, and our great effort in South Vietnam do not comprise a compatible and integrated policy for Southeast Asia. U.S. objectives in Southeast Asia cannot be achieved by either economic, political, or military measures alone. All 3 fields must be integrated into a single, broad U.S. program for Southeast Asia. Later we shall deal in more detail with this new military line, which Taylor was here expounding. But while we are weighing these words, we should note that the U.S. military, more precisely, that part that was closely affiliated with the CIA, and by 1964 General Taylor must be considered to be among them, was underscoring here that the United States, as well as overseas, the new political, social economic role of the Army. This subject is only inferently introduced in Taylor's report, but as we shall see later, it had become the dominant theme in the peacetime operations Army procedure of this period. At the same time, it should be noted that Taylor, operating most certainly under the provisions set forth by President Kennedy in his National Security Action Memorandum No. 55 of June 1961, is strongly announcing his support for covert actions against North Vietnam. This would have become quite uncharacteristic and unthinkable in the Army before this time. It became secret team type doctrine because the team knew all too well that covert operations of sufficient size and volume could be exploited, like the carbon rods in a nuclear reactor, to raise or lower the level of radioactivity, or to heat up a latent insurgency situation to the level desired. This has been done in Laos for 15 or more years. The policies that have been used in Indochina create and generate more combat than they quench. It has been said that the Vietnamese War is one of rencounter, the idea being that if you hit someone, even little, starving, terrorized, and homeless natives long enough, they will eventually fight back with whatever bits of remaining strength they have. Thus, Taylor's following words take on certain special significance. It is our Joint Chiefs of Staff's conviction that if support of the insurgency from outside South Vietnam in terms of operational direction, personnel, and material were stopped completely, the character of the war in South Vietnam would be substantially and favorably altered. Because of this conviction, we are wholly in favor of executing the covert actions against North Vietnam which you have recently proposed to the President. These were the covert actions which the group chaired by General Krulak had developed. We believe, however, that it would be idle to conclude that these efforts will have a decisive effect on the communist determination to support the insurgency, and it is our view that we must therefore be prepared fully to undertake a much higher level of activity, not only for its beneficial tactical effect, but to make plain our resolution both to our friends and our enemies. Following this statement, which like others written by his special staff and by his CIA associates, General Taylor listed 10 activities which he said the United States must make ready to conduct in Southeast Asia. One of these was to commit U.S. forces as necessary in support of the combat action within South Vietnam. He added, the past few months have disclosed that considerably higher levels of effort are demanded of the past few months have disclosed that considerably higher levels of effort are demanded of us if U.S. objectives are to be attained. In the inner chambers of the government, where secret operations are cloaked in sufficient cover story language to keep even the experts and top echelon leaders in a state of unreality, nothing even more closely approached the Emperor's New Clothes syndrome than did the secret team's work on Johnson, Rusk, McCone, and McNamara. Townsend Hoops, who spent years in the Pentagon in the awesome environment, wrote in the Washington Post of the August 17, 1971, the altered assignments in the communist world were much clearer in 1964 than in 1960, making it, again, in theory, easier for Johnson to take a fresh look. But the abrupt and tragic way in which he had come to the White House, the compulsions of the 1964 presidential campaign, and his own lack of a steady compass in foreign affairs, not to mention the powerful and nearly unanimous views of his inherited advisors, effectively ruled out a basic reprisal of our national interests in Vietnam. Like each predecessor, Johnson decided, as one analyst put it, that it would be inconvenient for him to lose South Vietnam this year. There is a fine point to add to Mr. Hoopes's perceptions. Johnson not only did not make a basic reprisal of our national interests in Vietnam, but he did not check out the compass to assure himself that the ship of state was on the same course that it had been sailing before he took the helm of office. He never took the time nor made the effort to check out the secret team. He just took it for granted that it was on the same course after Kennedy's death as before. This was the first big oversight. The point is suitable, and the change was at each turn slight, but the long-range course was being altered dynamically. Each report he received gave the semblance of normalcy, and each report was a reasonable part of the pattern with which he was somewhat familiar. No one would deny that Lyndon Johnson was not an intimate of Jack Kennedy's, and that, especially in matters pertaining to Vietnam, he really did not know the president's mind. In fact, that he had The fact that he had been to Vietnam may actually have been more of a cover story and a handicap for him than a view of reality. Brainwashing was the business of the secret team in South Vietnam. No less than Robert McNamara, Robert Kennedy, Vice President Johnson, and John McCone were thoroughly indoctrinated in South Vietnam by hardened experts who thought nothing of sharpening the scenarios skillfully drawn for consummation by top-level officials. Allen W. Dulles meant it when he called his book The Craft of Intelligence. To him and his inner ring of confidants and paramilitary experts, big-time intelligence was craftily managed. As a result, these carefully drawn reports told the president that things were getting much worse in Southeast Asia and that there was a strong possibility of a communist takeover of all of South Asia if South Vietnam and Laos and then Cambodia succumbed to the insurgency which the team said was running rampant there. After the reports and briefings of December 1963 and January 1964, it became evident that Johnson was giving way before the pressures of the CIA and the military, who were working with the agency. It is essential that the term military be clarified for use throughout this book. Many military men are regularly assigned to the CIA in their primary roles as intelligence experts for their own experience and training and to flesh out areas where the agency can use them. These are legitimate military assignments, and such men are openly identified with the CIA. There is another group of military men who are fully assigned to the agency, meaning their pay and allowances are reimbursed to the parent service by the CIA. But they appear to be with regular military units or other normal assignments so that their assignment to the CIA will not be revealed to those unwitting of their real task. These men are on cover assignments. Some of them are completely detached from the service for the period of their assignment, although they get promotions and other benefits similar to those of their contemporaries. Then there are other military personnel working with the CIA who are really agency employees, but who are permitted to wear the uniform and rank of grade of their reserve or National Guard status. And lastly, there are other CIA personnel who, for special reasons, are permitted to assume the uniform or at least the identity of one of the military services with rank as is necessary, even though they have no real service connection. There are few of these latter individuals, but they do exist. It is also true that for certain practical purposes, nearly all CIA personnel carry the identification card of the Department of Defense or some other government agency in order that they will have simple cover for such things as credit cards and banking accounts, so they will not have to reveal their employment with the CIA. This category is simply a technical expedient and is not intended in the first instance to be used for clandestine purposes. This strong military bias of the agency plays a very important part in the operations of the secret team and will be discussed more fully in later chapters. It probably played an impressive role in the winning of President Johnson's mind soon after he took office. He no doubt, as did most others, looked to such men as General Maxwell Taylor, General Victor Krulak, General William Rosen, General Edward Lansdale, General William Piers, General Richard G. Stilwell, General William Dupuy, and many others as straight-line military officers. Although, without question, they all were military men, they all also had assignments of various types and made them effective CIA operators. By the very nature of their work, they worked with, for and in support of the CIA. It was their first allegiance. Those mentioned above form but a brief list of the great number of senior officers in this category. After these first reports of December 1963 and early 1964, the next round of secret team maneuvers was planned as they worked to upgrade the war. It became time for McNamara to bring things up to date with the White House. On March 16, 1964, he made a report to the president on steps to change the trend of the war. This report was long discursive. It even included the line, "Substantial reductions in the numbers of U.S. military training personnel should occur before the end of 1965. Notice how the words were put. This report had the ring of the old "home by end of 1965" report of October 2, 1963, but with a significant difference. In October, Taylor and McNamara had said to Kennedy that it should be possible to withdraw the bulk of U.S. personnel. The key word is personnel, as opposed to the March 16th military training personnel. The Vietnam War has always been a most unusual one from the standpoint of its being a non-typical war. A very large number of U.S. personnel in this war were not military. There were thousands from other government agencies. There were tens of thousands of civilian workers of all kinds. The helicopter maintenance support alone required fantastic numbers of civilian maintenance personnel and contract workers. Kennedy knew this, and when he was told that U.S. personnel would be coming home, he knew that meant a comprehensive and meaningful number. However, when McNamara told Johnson that substantial reductions in military training personnel would take place, he was talking about a small slice of the pie. Even if all the training personnel came home, there would still be a lot of U.S. manpower there. The distinction was meaningful. It was brainwashing and misleading, and intentionally so. Lines such as this were added simply for flavoring. The secret team writers would not expect the president to notice the difference. He would hear the words "reductions in personnel." Oops. Did I skip a page? Nope. He would hear the words "reductions and personnel" only. Meanwhile, the secret team had a safety valve in their report in the event they had to account for this report at a later date, something they always planned for, but seldom, if ever, had to do. After all the words, recent history of Indochina involvement, and some philosophizing contained in this lengthy McNamara report, the final paragraph held the meat of the proposition. To prepare immediately to be in position on 72-hour notice to initiate the full range of Laotian and Cambodian border control actions beyond those authorized in paragraph 11. This is paragraph 12. And the retaliatory actions against North Vietnam, and to be in a position on 30 days' notice to initiate the program of graduated overt military pressure against North Vietnam. This was another big step forward on the way to inevitable escalation. It is one thing for a nation to plan for a clandestine operation with an agent or agents to arrange for its success, or in the event of failure, to totally deny involvement. All such activities are planned in such a way that the nation taking the action may be able to disclaim plausibility to the entire world that it had anything to do with such an action. But the action above is serious international business, because at the very root of the plan is the intent to violate the sovereignty of another nation. Wars have been started in such events. When a nation feels that it must resort to clandestine activities, it does so with great caution, and then only with agents who are specially prepared for such work. In no case, or in the very rarest cases, are members of the diplomatic service and of the uniformed military service ever used for such acts. Honor and honesty in the Society of Nations demand that the diplomatic corps and military services be beyond reproach. The paragraph quoted above from McNamara's March 16th report not only proposed more or less routine covert activity against Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam, but it added that the United States should plan for overt military pressure against North Vietnam, thus carrying through the momentum of action initiated with his December 21st, 1963 report. The die was cast. The Gulf of Tonkin incident occurred on August 4, 1963, and from that time to the President's announcement of the massive buildup of forces, there could be no doubting that course laid out for the United States in Indochina. This course was set by the winds of change as this government responded to and reacted to various intelligence data inputs as far back as 1945. Vietnam was not so much a goal as it was a refuge and backlash of everything that had gone wrong in a quarter century of clandestine activities. There can be no questioning the fact that Vietnam inherited some of the Korea leftovers. It inherited the Magsaysay team from the Philippines, with its belief in another Robin Hood like Magsaysay, in the person of Nigel Diem. It fell heir to the Indonesian shambles. It soaked up men and materials from the Tibetan campaign and from Laos in particular, and it inherited men and material, including a large number of specially modified aircraft from the Bay of Pigs disaster. In its leadership, it inherited men who had been in Greece in the late 40s or during the Eisenhower era, and who felt that they knew communist insurgency when they saw it. The nation of South Vietnam had not existed as a nation before 1954. Rather, it was another country's piece of real estate. South Vietnam has never really been a nation. It has become a quagmire of things gone wrong during the past 25 years. In the August 7, 1971 issue of the New Republic, the Asian scholar Eugene G. Winchie says, "What steered the nation into Vietnam was a series of tiny but powerful cabals, what he calls a series of tiny but powerful conspiracies. This book puts all together as the actions of the secret team. The most valuable book by David Weiss and Thomas B. Ross calls this power source the invisible government. And in the chapter on the various intelligence organizations in the United States, they use the term secret elite. The CIA did not begin as a secret team, as a series of tiny but powerful cabals, as the invisible government, or as members of the secret elite, but before long it became a bit of all of these. President Truman was exactly right when he said that the CIA had been diverted from its original assignment. This diversion and the things that have happened as a result of it will be the subject of the remainder of this book." That's it for Chapter 1.